Chapter 5, Socialization and Gender Roles. We need to understand the concepts of gender, sex, gender identity, gender roles, and gender stereotypes in order to understand gender roles in the context of socialization. So we're going to take a look at how people learn gender roles and how these gender roles affect people's everyday lives and their family relations. So the chapter compares the 5 perspectives that explain why gender roles differ: sociobiology, social learning theory, cognitive development theory, symbolic interaction theories, and feminist theories. And this chapter also looks at the 5 sources of learning gender roles: the agents of socialization, parents, siblings, peers, schools, the media, and pop culture. And thirdly, the chapter looks at how gender roles vary across adulthood and across cultures. Many of us believe that men and women are very different. We describe men as aggressive, courageous, and ambitious and confident. We describe women as emotional, talkative, patient, and affectionate, and timid. Yet, this may not be the way you, your family, or friends are. We even may change over the years. So is there a difference between sex and gender? Often sex and gender are terms we use interchangeably, but each are distinct in their meaning. Sex is biological, while gender is cultural. So we say that sex is a biological designation and gender is a cultural creation that teaches us how to play male or female roles. Sex refers to the biological characteristics with which people are born and that determine whether one is male or female. And these include chromosomes, the anatomy, hormones, and other physical and physiological characteristics. Sex influences our behaviors, but it does not determine how we think, feel, and act. We learn how to be masculine or feminine through our gender. Gender refers to learned attitudes and behaviors that characterize women and men. This is based on social and cultural expectations and not physical traits. It's a social construction. Most people are born either male or female, but we learn to associate certain behavior patterns according to each sex. Gender identity is a perception that people develop about themselves as masculine or feminine. Our gender identity typically corresponds to a person's biological sex, is learned in early childhood, and remains relatively fixed throughout our life. Most people internalize the cultural meanings associated with this biological sex and then regulate their behavior to conform to culture's expectations of what is male and what is female. People's gender identity becomes part of their self-concept, but people differ in the extent to which a gender identity is important to them. For example, men who think of themselves as masculine might be passive, while women who think of themselves as feminine may be aggressive. And both sexes experience emotions like happiness and sadness just as deeply, but they differ in how they express these emotions, regardless of sex, gender, and gender identity. Gender roles are the characteristics, attitudes, feelings, and behaviors that society expects of males and females. We learn to become male or female through our interactions with family members and the larger society. Social scientists often describe people's roles as gendered, treating and evaluating males and females differently because of their sex. And because gender roles are learned and not innate, people can change them. For example, like when women who work and contribute to finances, and when men who help care for children and do domestic chores. Gender stereotypes are the expectations about how people will look, act, think, and feel based on their sex. Now, the U.S. is very rigid in its stereotypes and gender stereotypes. In the U.S., we tend to associate stereotypically female characteristics with weakness and stereotypically male characteristics with strength. The Run Like a Girl campaign is a campaign and video that I believe I shared in class, but I will have that video posted in Blackboard and e-learning. Stereotypes may seem harmless, but they can have negative consequences. Men and women are often described differently. Females as agreeable, warm, and kind. Males as assertive, confident, and ambitious. Having the male traits, assertive and ambitious, are good. They're good traits for a job. But having the female traits, whether you are male or female, is not good for getting a job. And here we have Serena Williams, an athlete. Many people view female athletes as unfeminine, butch, or less powerful than men. So you have to think about, do such stereotypes characterize most female athletes, such as Serena Williams, who was the 2015 Athlete of the Year? Next, we have the nature-nurture debate. A debate exists between those who argue the differences in women's and men's behavior are a result of innate biological characteristics. Biologists argue this. And those who believe that socialization and culture are important in understanding human development. Sociologists and social scientists argue this part of the debate. So this is the nature, biology, heredity versus nurture, socialization and culture, the environment. So how important is nature? How important is nurture? And what can we conclude about the nature versus nurture debate? So first, how important is nature? The evidence that biology or nature shapes behavior include developmental and health differences, effects of sex hormones, and unsuccessful sex reassignment. So we'll go through each of these categories. First, developmental and health differences. Research indicates that boys mature more slowly, they get sick more often, and they are less likely to master self-control and fine motor skills. Boys are also at greater risk than girls for most of the major learning and developmental disorders. They are 4 times more likely to suffer from autism, ADD, and dyslexia. Girls, on the other hand, are at least 2 times as likely as boys to suffer from depression, anxiety, and eating disorder. With regard to our senses, as we get older and become adults, smell and taste become more acute in women than in men. Hearing is better in women and lasts longer than in men. And women are at higher risk of diabetes, migraine headaches, breast cancer, and men are more likely to develop hemophilia and skin cancers. Next, we have the effects of sex hormones. Scientists believe that hormones provide a part of the answer as to why there are such health differences between men and women. Hormones are the chemical substances secreted into the bloodstream by the endocrine glands. Estrogen is a dominant in females and produced by the ovaries. Progesterone is present in high levels during pregnancy and also it's secreted by the ovaries. And testosterone is dominant in males and produced by the testes. All 3 are shared by males and females. Before puberty, both sexes have tiny quantities of all 3 of these hormones in their system. After puberty, different levels of hormones in males and females will produce different physiological changes. So for example, testosterone, the dominant male hormone, strengthens muscles, but it can also threaten the heart, which is also a muscle. It triggers the production of low-density lipoprotein, which clogs blood vessels, and men have 2 times the risk of heart disease. The dominant female hormone, especially estrogen, make blood vessels more elastic and strengthen the immune system. Having too much or not enough estrogen can increase the risk of heart disease and breast cancer. Next, we have the example of unsuccessful sex reassignment. These are also useful as examples of the nature over nurture in the debate. In the 1960s, psychologist John Mooney published studies arguing that gender identity is not firm at birth. So gender identity is not firm at birth, and that it is as much determined by culture and nature. His conclusions were challenged. What happened, however, is that even after a sex reassignment, after an injury at birth, raising a boy as a girl, the David as Brenda case, was not successful. She preferred playing with boys and with boy toys. This indicates that something in the biological makeup was still at play in Brenda/David. So in this case, there was again a medical accident at birth. David or Brenda was a twin, and the parents were presented with the choice to raise their child as a girl. And Dr. Mooney, who again, he was very much challenged. He was a very controversial doctor. The case indicates that he possibly was taking advantage or exploiting this particular case. And the parents never really shared with David or Brenda at the time that he was a boy and that they were raising him as a girl. And but he always had these feelings that arose, and so eventually he had surgery to become Brenda, and because again something in his biological makeup was always still at play. He felt like he didn't fit in, so there's a story, and there's a video here that I will share online at eLearning so that you can learn a little bit more about the David Brenda Reimer case. Other studies also support this. At Johns Hopkins, again, this is where actually John Mooney was, followed 14 boys who were altered at birth, but this was because of a disorder affecting the boys when they were born. A little different than what happened to David. Only 5 of the boys were living happily as girls, while the rest, 9 of them, were reassigned themselves as boys. Next, we have how important is nurture, and social scientists argue that nurture is more significant than nature because socialization and culture shape our human behavior. And we have 3 arguments that will be provided: the cross-cultural differences in gender roles, cross-cultural differences in male violence, and successful sex reassignment. Anthropologist Margaret Mead's classic study in 1935 observed 3 tribes. These 3 tribes in New Guinea lived within short distance of one another. Her study of these 3 tribes led her to conclude that characteristics such as aggression versus nurturance were culturally rather than biologically determined. So she studied the Arapesh, the Mundugumors, and the Chimbulis. The Arapesh is where both men and women nurtured children. Men were also very cooperative, sensitive, and rarely engaged in warfare. The Mundugumors, men and women, were competitive and aggressive. They were not nurturing. They used physical punishment as discipline. And the Chumbuli were actually the opposite of Western gender roles. Women were the economic providers. Men took care of children and sat around and gossiped and spent their time decorating themselves for tribal festivities. Next, cross-cultural variation in male violence. If it is in men's nature to be aggressive, then we would expect men to be equally violent across all societies. However, if we look at the proportion of women who suffered physical abuse by a male partner, we find varying results. 90% in Pakistan, 61% in Peru, 36% in the US, and 13% in Japan. So variation in violence we see when we compare these countries in the violence against women. Also, all mass murderers have been males. These are the murders where a large number of victims are killed in one incident. Most of the mass murders were committed by white males occurred in the United States. These variations indicate the influence of cultural laws and practices and other environmental factors, nurture, rather than biology or heredity, nature. Other cultures maintain more control over women's behavior through the use of violence. In the Mideast, if a woman dishonors her family, she is killed. In many societies, women are treated like second-class citizens as a result of cultural and religious values, customs, and laws. This does not mean that all men are aggressive and all women are nonviolent. In the U.S., women make up 18% of all those arrested for violent crimes, including murder. Next, we have a successful sex assignment. Whereas earlier we saw how sex reassignment is used as an example of biology, leaving an imprint on our gender roles and gender identity. Now we will see how it is an example of culture. Intersexuals or hermaphrodites are people born with both male and female sex organs. The parents of intersexual children usually choose a sex for the child. Surgery and hormone treatments are used to change the genital organs. The parents then raise their child according to the selected gender role. They give the child a name, either male or female. They dress the child in either masculine or feminine clothing, and they teach gender-appropriate behaviors. Most of these sex assignments have been successful, indicating that socialization may be more important than biology in shaping one's gender identity. Also, transsexuals who have had surgery report being happy and not regretting the surgery. So what can we conclude about the nature-nurture debate? So we're moving toward a more genetically informed sociology. Research that combines both nature and nurture enhances our understanding of how social factors affect genetic predispositions. Genes shape our lives and could help explain why there is so much variation across families and other groups. Individuals have at least 52 characteristics that are partially inherited, things like aggression, leadership, and cognitive ability. The social environment can either enhance or reduce these genetic characteristics. Research exploring the differences between the sexes show that males and females are more alike than different on the following: cognitive ability, verbal and nonverbal communication, leadership traits, and self-esteem. So nature is where human development is innate, biological, physiological, due largely to heredity, and fairly fixed. Nurture, on the other hand, is where human development is learned, psychological, social, cultural, due largely to the environment, and very changeable. So why do gender roles differ? Gender roles change throughout the life course. They are not fixed at age 4. To understand these changes, let's discuss 5 common theories. The first we'll discuss is sociobiology, then we'll talk about social learning theory, cognitive development theory, symbolic interactionist theories, and feminist theories. So first, sociobiology. Sociobiology is the study of how biology affects social behavior. Sociobiologists argue that evolution and genetic factors, nature, can explain why men are generally more aggressive than women. Compare it to the animal world, where the male in the pack must fight for the attention of the female in the species. Sociobiological explanations are controversial because practically every behavior is influenced by the environment, socialization, and culture. For example, male aggression can vary across cultures, and women can be just as aggressive and violent as men. According to social learning theory, people learn attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors through their social interaction. This is a result of reinforcement, imitation, and modeling. Reinforcement occurs when people receive direct or indirect rewards or punishments for particular gender role behaviors. A little girl is dressed up and is told she looks pretty, but a boy is scolded if they put on a girl's play clothes. Also, girls are not scolded if they cry, but if a boy cries, like at a baseball game, they are told boys don't cry. Through observation and imitation, children learn by who does what in their families. So even when children are not directly rewarded or punished for behaving like boys or behaving like girls, they are learning this behavior by watching who does what in their families. For example, men are always working, or women are always concerned with their appearance. Now, role models are people who we admire and whose behavior we try to imitate. Our parents, the early and primary agent of socialization, are also emotionally important to children. They are usually the most important role models. But others, including siblings and teachers, friends, coaches, and even celebrities, can have this sort of influence, the role model influence. Social learning helps us to understand why we behave as we do. But because the emphasis is on early socialization, it doesn't explain why gender roles change later in life, and also why reinforcement may work for some children and not for others, even within the same family, even with twins, studies on twins. Now, there's a YouTube video where we follow along in social learning, and we conform to groups. So I'm going to share that video on e-learning. In contrast to social learning theory, we have cognitive development theory. And according to this theory, children acquire male or female values on their own by thinking, reasoning, and interpreting information in their environment. John Piaget is the theorist most known for this cognitive development theory. There's the sensory motor, there are stages. The sensory motor stage, the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage, and the formal operational stage. And he says that we must pass through these stages as our self develops. Sensory motor is where we are learning, a baby is learning about their environment through the senses, the five senses. Sight, taste, smell, hearing, and touch. In the pre-operational stage, the child is making more sense out of the symbols. They're learning the symbols for things. Water, with a glass of water. So they're putting words and symbols. And then in the concrete operational stage, sort of making more sense out of those symbols, putting sentences together, thinking a little bit more concretely. At the formal operational stage, you're learning morals and values, and this is adolescence typically. That this stage sort of arrives, and you could think a little, more abstractly. By age 3 or 4, girls know that she is a girl and prefers girl things to boy things. By age 5, most children expect disapproval if they play with opposite sex toys and therefore avoid those toys, especially if that disapproval comes from their peers. Upon acquiring masculine or feminine values, children will tend to identify with people of the same sex as themselves. Children will often evaluate the behavior of others as being gender appropriate, good, or gender inappropriate, bad. By the time we reach adolescence, this sex typing becomes very rigid because teens want to conform to their peers. Gender stereotypes, and so they want to conform to what those stereotypes are. But because there's very inflexible, because they become more flexible as adults, not as flexible as adolescents. So when peers become less influential in their lives as you start to become an adult, those stereotypes don't play as big a role. Those of us who have internalized these sex type standards will often expect stereotypically behaviors from others. Cognitive development theories help us understand the relationship between maturing, and learning these gender roles. The limitations are that it does not explain individual differences among children, and it exaggerates gender learning as something that children do themselves. Next, we have symbolic interaction theories. For interactionists, gender roles are socially constructed categories that emerge in social situations. We do gender consciously and unconsciously in our day-to-day interactions by accommodating our behavior to people's gender role expectations. So for example, when a female expects a male to pull out her chair or open a car door when they're out on a date. Sociologist Erving Goffman referred to these processes as impression management, also known as the dramaturgical approach, where people are like actors on a stage. This is when we provide information or cues to others to present ourselves in a favorable light, while downplaying or covering up our flaws. So for example, we want to give a good impression on a job interview, when trying to impress a date. According to Goffman, all people engage in impression management almost every day by controlling the image that we project. We want to look good. We want to look younger. So there's big investment in cosmetics and cosmetic surgery and any anti-aging products so that we can maintain a youthful appearance to look good. We color our hair, we use anti-aging products. Some people get plastic surgery. Botox is a big thing. So it's all to give a good impression, men and women alike. This theory helps explain how gender and gender roles shape our everyday lives. But one limitation is that interactionists imply that people have more free will than they actually have. For example, those in lower or working classes and those who are older may have fewer resources to purchase those goods and services to improve their image. Also, interactionists often downplay or ignore the macro level and structural factors that affect our gender roles. For example, during economic downsizing, gender roles are affected when one or both partners can no longer support their families. So for example, women who may have been a stay-at-home mom now maybe needs to become an earner in the family when the husband is laid off from work. Next, we have feminist theories. And according to many feminist scholars, like interactionists, they view gender as a socially constructed role that is taught carefully and repeatedly. Our gender script, or how society says people are supposed to act because of their sex, becomes a part of our sense of self. Over time, these gender scripts value men more than women. Globally, women have a second-class status to men. For feminists, the much lower number of women in powerful positions is due to sexism, which is an attitude or behavior that discriminates against one sex, usually females, based on the assumed superiority of the other sex, usually males. According to feminists, if people change their attitudes about traditional roles, behavior would change across a society. The feminists have shown that gender roles have a powerful influence on families and are linked to other social institutions like the economy and government. Feminist theories are often criticized for being too narrow. Also, men have accused feminists of not addressing how gender roles actually harm men, reducing them to being emotionalist, and by sexist stereotyping that all men are slobs or pigs or things of that names of that nature. So here we have a table listing the different perspectives we just went over: sociobiology, social learning theory, cognitive development theories, symbolic interaction theories, and feminist theories. And in the right-hand column, you'll see the view of gender roles. So how do we learn gender roles? People learn gender roles from a variety of sources, and some of the most important agents of socialization are parents and siblings, peers and playgroups, teachers and schools, pop culture, and the media. So first we'll talk about parents. Parents are usually a child's first and most influential socializing agent, often treating male and female infants differently from birth. Girls may be handled more gently and cuddled more. Boys may be handled in a more rough and tumble manner. Other relatives like siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents are also important in the socialization process. But parents shape their children's gender roles in several ways, like how we talk and communicate, the expectations that are set for them, and providing opportunities for appropriate activities. Parents often communicate differently with boys than with girls, starting at a very early age. Even babies as young as 6 to 14 months. Mothers talk more to their daughters than to their sons and comfort and hug their daughters more often. Mothers also give boys more room to explore their environment on their own. And then teachers reinforce a sense of this independence. Girls don't get this message of independence. So before babies can even speak, they are getting these gendered messages. When we think of toddlers, the way parents talk to their children often depends on the context. The difference: when engaged in physical care, mothers tend to be assertive, like eat your food, get dressed. When engaged in playing, fathers are more likely than mothers to, give polite commands rather than requests, and to ignore a child's demands. So they'll say, please stop, can you stop, and do you want this or do you want that? The differences indicate that men tend to be more authoritative than women, and that women are less demanding and more compliant. By the time they get to school, girls will more likely seek agreement and cooperation, while boys will more likely dominate and command language. Setting expectations are also gender typed by parents. We accept crying as normal in young children, but as children grow older, this changes. Parents begin to discourage or disapprove of boys from crying well before age 13. On the other hand, when girls cry, they are comforted. Girls and women cry more than males across societies. Also, 10 to 17-year-old boys spend less time on household chores and spend more time playing. Mothers often start critiquing their children's, especially their daughters' weight and physical appearance. Fathers will comment more on the appearance of their daughters than their sons. Expectations for academic performance is also gendered or gender biased. Mothers and fathers believe that boys have more natural ability in math than girls do, and to believe that math is more important for boys than girls, and to expect boys to get higher grades in math, while encouraging sons to pursue careers that require math skills. During childhood and adolescence, parents provide children with activities and opportunities that culture defines as gender appropriate. Parents have the best intentions for their sons and daughters, but by suppressing their interests or talents because of gender socialization. And this can be prevalent. A boy can prevent a boy from becoming a dancer, or a girl from playing football, or a girl from enrolling in STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and math classes, and boys from the social sciences or the liberal arts. Play is a very important part of a child's development. A child's work is play. It provides pleasure, it forms friendships, and builds communication, emotional, and social skills. Peer groups are also very important. A peer group consists of people who are similar in age, social status, and interests. Peers, as an agent of socialization, are especially influential until about our mid-20s. After our mid-20s, our coworkers, partners, spouses, children, and other close friends are more central than our peers in our day-to-day lives. Play from an early age is generally gender typed. Preschoolers, when playing alone, often we find girls prefer feminine activities like playing with dolls, and often we find boys playing with balls or trucks, cars, and airplanes. When playing together, boys and girls often are equally likely to play with feminine as well as masculine toys and activities. This indicates that gender-typed play breaks down when playing together and encourages a greater range of activities. So we're going to do in class a gender mixer activity to illustrate how oftentimes even just toys are marketed to boys and girls in a very different way. Siblings often act as role models, as we talked about previously, and peers gain a greater influence as children grow into the teen years. Both siblings and peers can have both positive or negative impacts. For example, with regard to siblings, older siblings can encourage younger brothers and sisters to do well in school and stay away from the bad crowd. They also may, however, pass on that engaging in certain activities is not that big of a deal. So, for example, if the older sibling may smoke or drink, that may often be influential. As peers gain that greater influence and families' influence becomes somewhat less, friends will enforce desirable behavior to enhance a child's self-image. Peers can be positive role models. Maybe they complement good academic skills or a talent. Children learn from their peers in the early days of school. How to stand in line, how to raise their hand in class, how to be quiet when the teacher is speaking. Peers can also be very supportive of one another with issues they may be uncomfortable about going to their parents about. But not all peer influences are positive. For example, during 7th to 12th grades, having a best friend that engages in deviant behavior like smoking, skipping school, increases the likelihood they will imitate that behavior. In U.S. society, many adolescents want to be popular. They want to feel like they're part of the in-group, be accepted by their peers. Feeling unpopular, especially for girls, has a negative impact, and it may affect their physical as well as their emotional health. And here we have that gender remixer activity I mentioned. Parents here are important socializing agents. Encouraged by her mother from an early age, Tiara Gunn graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, in 2017, and she works for Boeing as an aerospace engineer. Gender influences both students' and teachers' experiences. Teachers in schools often reflect the gendered attitudes and practice of the larger society, from preschool through college. First, primary and secondary education. Teachers are among the most important agents of socialization from kindergarten through high school. Their role is gaining in importance. They play the role of instructor, role model, disciplinarian, and moral guide. A large part of the child's day is spent in school. When children enter kindergarten, they perform similarly on both reading and mathematics tests. By the third grade, boys on average score higher than girls in math and science assessments and lower than girls in reading tests. Teachers' attitudes toward the subject matter influence their instructional techniques, how they teach the content, and ultimately their students' attitudes toward a subject. Negative stereotypes about girls' abilities in math and science can also significantly lower girls' test performance and lower their aspirations. When teachers tell girls and boys in elementary and middle schools that they are both equally capable, they show equally performance levels. If we believe in gender difference, it can actually produce those differences. Since 1981, there have been more females than males enrolled in college when it comes to higher education now. Women across all racial ethnic groups now earn a larger percent of associates, bachelor's, and master's degrees than men. This is a far cry from our historical look at women who could not get an education because they were tied to domestic chores. A major gender gap is the underrepresentation of women in high-paying fields of STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. In college, female students are initially as persistent as men in a STEM major, but they are less satisfied than men with the courses and more likely to doubt they will succeed in the male-dominated field. This results in women changing majors because they lose the self-confidence. They also don't have a female faculty as a mentor. Many male and female professors share a common belief that female students will benefit less from mentoring because they are less competent than men. So that also plays an influence. Pop culture and the media. Our gender identity is influenced by media images and myths on a daily basis. First, let's look at advertising. Girls aged 11 to 14 are subjected to about 500 ads a day in the internet, billboards, magazines. When you think about teen magazines, they contain about 45% of more ads, 27% of tobacco ads than in adult magazines. So again, starting advertising at a younger age. And the majority of which are these billboards, these internet postings and ads and pictures, the majority are airbrushed, they're photoshopped to perfection. So it gives a really unattainable image. Many girls and young women get a message that they have to be gorgeous, thin, almost perfect to be loved by others. They get the message from their parents, their boyfriends, etc. 43% of girls aged 6 to 9 years old wear lipstick or lip gloss. 38% use hair styling products. 12% use other cosmetics. Girls 8 to 10 years old spend $40 million a month on beauty products. 80% of 10-year-old girls have been on a diet, and girls aged 13 to 18 say shopping is their favorite pastime. Studies show that women are unhappy with their bodies. Seeing images of beautiful, ultra-thin models, actresses, leaves women feeling dissatisfied with their own bodies, and they engage in unhealthy eating habits and excessive dieting. If we take a look at men, men's health and fitness magazines will show models who go several months dieting dehydrating themselves because it will cause their skin to tighten and their muscles to pop out. Photoshop, camera, and lighting tricks also produce hypermasculine images that are unrealistic to achieve. The American Academy of Pediatrics in 2001 advises parents to avoid TV for children under the age of 2 years old. The AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, tells parents to limit the number of hours of viewing to 2 hours per day for elementary school children, and they try to encourage more interactive activities like playing and reading, outdoor activities. So the electronic media is something that is of great concern to pediatricians. The average American youngster spends practically every waking minute using a smartphone, computer, TV, video console, or other electronic device. Research is indicating that children who spend more time with media have lower grades and lower levels of personal contentment. Children are overexposed, and this ultimately affects cognitive ability, like concentration on homework, and it creates a distraction. There's also a growing concern for the increase in violent video games. These games normalize violence. In other words, the more children are exposed to violence in the games that they play, it is not as horrific. Also, many of these games depict violence against women, male to female aggression, and often overly sexualized women. More research needs to be done in this area because many young males are not showing an increase in violent behavior. They are merely games or gaming enthusiasts. We also did our content analysis of children's books, kind of illustrate how messages, gender messages, that it's another mechanism for teaching children gender roles. So here's the concern in the media about ultra-thin images of models promoting girls and young women's eating disorders. In this section, we will discuss instrumental and expressive roles. Who takes on which role? Then we will discuss the benefits and costs of traditional gender roles. Now, gender ideology or gender role ideology refers to the attitudes concerning the appropriate roles, rights, and responsibilities of women and men in society. Egalitarian gender ideologies encourage men and women to share the breadwinning and nurturing family roles. We call those egalitarian relationships. On the other hand, traditional gender role ideologies emphasize distinct instrumental and expressive family roles for men and women. Functionalists developed a model of the family in which the male fulfills an instrumental role. He provides shelter, food, he's the worker, the breadwinner, and the female fulfills the expressive role. She's the homemaker, the nurturer, and provides emotional support. Although some critics view these descriptions of traditional gender roles as outdated, they are a reality in many U.S. homes and worldwide. Instrumental role players are traditionally the husbands and fathers who must be real men. And a real man produces children, he's the protector of his family, and he provides for his family's financial well-being by working outside of the home. The expressive role players are played by wives and mothers. They provide the emotional support and nurturing qualities to support the family and the husband, father. They should be warm, sensitive, and sympathetic. The role of kin keepers is an expressive role. It is passed down from mother to daughter. A kin keeper maintains contacts with relatives, keeping in touch with friends and families, sending birthday cards, emails, remembering anniversaries, organizing holiday gatherings, and family reunions. Males take on the instrumental role, Males taking on the instrumental role frees up women to take on expressive roles and vice versa. Because if men work outside the home, women can concentrate on taking care of the home. So if men are working outside the home, women can concentrate on taking care of the home. Traditional gender roles have both benefits and costs, and they may be chosen consciously or a result of habit, custom, or socialization. So some of the benefits. They provide stability, continuity, and predictability because each person knows what is expected of each other. Husbands and wives don't have to argue about who does what. Because some women don't have to work outside the home or be responsible for economic decisions, they tend to stay in traditional relationships. She can enjoy the prestige and status of her husband's accomplishments. She doesn't have to feel tension and stress of a job and housework. Men benefit because they are sure that their wives are managing the home, caring for the children, preparing the meals, and running the errands. Here are some of the costs. Being a sole breadwinner is very stressful. He may be constantly worried about the economic well-being of the family. Because many men get their self-esteem from their work and from being the provider, if that job is lost, some men feel depressed and may seek some outlet, such as alcohol or drugs. Violent rages and even suicide can result. Men have lower life expectancy. They often work in very dangerous jobs, as police or firefighters. They don't visit the doctor as frequently. So men are these risk takers. Women, on the other hand, can expect little relief from the never-ending tasks of caring for children in the home. That's exhausting and very monotonous. So why do these traditional gender roles persist? Well, number one, for some families, they can be rewarding, providing a sense of accomplishment in meeting the family's needs. And number two, traditional roles are profitable for business. Women are doing unpaid work, the housework and child care that companies don't have to pay for, and men can work extra hours. And third, these traditional roles maintain male privilege and power. Men can dominate political and legal institutions because women are perceived to have no leadership qualities. And here we have a table that sort of summarizes the benefits and costs for both men and women of traditional gender roles. I'll let you read those on your own. And here we have the percent of women's negative emotions by motherhood and employment status. So whether you're a stay-at-home mom, an employed mom, or employed women with no children at home. And you can see whether they're worried, sad, stressed, angered, and depressed. It seems that the stay-at-home moms are mostly worried, 41% higher percent. %50 of them are stressed. Almost 48% of employed women are too. Next, we're going to look at gender inequality in the family, the workplace, politics, education, religion, and with language and the way we communicate. Women appear to be dominating society as never before, according to the popular media accounts. These accounts indicate that women are outpacing men in education, becoming the family breadwinners, and they are even doing less housework and childcare than men. On the other hand, some argue that we still have widespread gender stratification, that is, having unequal access to wealth, power, status, opportunity, and other valued resources because of your sex. So let's take a look. If given the choice, 51% of American women and 76% of American men would prefer to work outside the home rather than stay at home and take care of the house and family. Many of us do not have this choice, And even when women work outside the home, they typically do a majority of the domestic chores as well. Women sometimes complain that men do not help enough with domestic chores. Working women, especially mothers, complain about having to do it all. Work outside the home, raise the children, and do all the homework. So do they? The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, an American Time Use survey in 2013 indicates that in 2012, men reported doing 2 hours of housework a day, and women reported doing 2.6 hours. And on an average day, women spent 1.1 hours on childcare for children less than age 6, compared to men's 26 minutes a day. So women are doing more of the housework and childcare, but there has been a significant shift in the role of men since 1965. For example, fathers with children under the age of 18 in the home have increased the number of hours they spend on childcare and housework, but less time in paid work. The more men help with housework, the less stress women experience, and they report more friendship, satisfaction, and intimacy with their partner. In a recent study, 57% of women want help more often from their partner or spouse, yet 42% said they don't trust their partner or spouse to meet their standards of clean. When it comes to family work conflicts, there are differences. 56% of mothers and 50% of fathers with children under the age of 18 say it is difficult to juggle work and family responsibilities. 40% of mothers and 34% of fathers report always feeling rushed. Fathers are much more likely to worry about not spending enough time with their children than mothers. Not surprising when men spend 7 hours a week and women spend 14 hours a week with their children. In the U.S., the average male still does not have options for flexible schedules, paternity leaves, or extended absences for household matters, and women often have to postpone childbearing if they want to pursue a career. And this is even with the greater workplace equality. We still have a long way to go. With more women in the workforce, there is more opportunity for sexual harassment. And sexual harassment is any unwanted sexual advance, request for sexual favors, or other conduct of a sexual nature that makes a person feel uncomfortable and interferes with his or her work. It includes both verbal and nonverbal behavior, as well as physical contact. The verbal includes pressure for dates or demands for sexual favors in return for hiring, promotion, or tenure, as well as the threat of rape. Nonverbal includes indecent gestures or the display of pictures or drawings of a sexual nature. And physical contact includes any form of touching, pitching, or even rape. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission received almost 206,000 formal sexual harassment complaints between 1997 and 2011. 84% were from female employees. This number may be higher, but some companies handle some complaints within the organization, not to mention those incidents that go unreported. For example, almost 25% of women have been sexually harassed at work. Only 40% of them reported the incident because they believed it wouldn't do any good, or they were afraid to be either fired or demoted. And here we have a table that illustrates how mothers' and fathers' roles have changed over the years from 1965 to 2011. And so to the left is the table for fathers, to the right is the table for mothers. And you can see childcare has definitely been improving for fathers, but mothers are still doing more of it. the hours that they spend with their children. Same thing with housework. Fathers are definitely doing more housework. Mothers are doing less. Fathers are doing much more of the paid work, but you could see the increase from 1965, the number of women who are doing paid work. Since 1872, there have been 36 women who have made a run for president of the United States. Victoria Chafflin Woodhull was the first, but not one has broken the glass ceiling. The U.S. has never had a woman serve as president nor vice president, unlike some other countries like Germany, Great Britain, Pakistan, Argentina, Chile, Israel, India, and the Philippines. Other elected officials like governor, mayor, and state legislators have had a woman in office, but these numbers have not changed much since the early 1990s. Women's voting rates in the U.S. have been higher than men's since 1984, so why might there be so few women in political office? Women see themselves as supporters rather than doers. They're socialized to be nurturers and volunteers. Therefore, women spend time supporting a candidate rather than running for office themselves. Next, women are less likely than men to receive encouragement to run for office. No political party or leaders get behind them, so that even successful women are 2 times as likely as men to think they are not qualified to run for office. And lastly, we have a lingering sexism among men and women that men are better leaders. When we look at the recent presidential campaign, take a look at how Hillary Clinton, so we're talking about the campaign between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and how they were portrayed in the media during the debates, etc., as compared to the men. So how is Hillary Clinton compared to the men when she was running for office? Women tend to get less media coverage, and when they do, it's often critical or derogatory comments are made on their appearance. And if we think about the most recent campaign that's going on right now with there were so many women that were running for the Democratic ticket, but once again, it became a man, Joe Biden, against Donald Trump, the current president. Here we have other elected offices since 2017, the number of women. So the number of office holders versus how many, the percent of women in those particular offices. Now we find some interesting statistics regarding education. In public kindergarten through 12 schools, as rank and pay increase, the number of women decreases. Among full-time teachers, 85% are at the elementary level are women. It drops to 58% at the high school level. Among principals, 59% at elementary level are women. It drops to 29% at the high school level. The feminization of higher education is in reference to the fact that women across all racial and ethnic groups are more likely than men to finish college. High school graduates are almost equal boys and girls. But once you reach the professional and doctoral degrees, men surpass women. There are sex differences in academic majors. For example, women avoiding or dropping STEM classes. And even when women earn doctorates in a male-dominated field, they are less likely than men to be hired. Once hired, women faculty are less likely to be promoted as compared to men. And since 1982, 1/3 of PhD recipients have been women, but as rank increases, the number of female faculty members decreases. And here you see educational attainment, those 25 years and older, by sex in 2016. So you see it's pretty much equal in high school, but as you start to look at the more advanced degrees, associate's degree, there are more women, bachelor's degree, more women, master's degree, but it makes a complete flip-flop when you get to the professional and doctoral degrees. Men are more likely to achieve those. Now, religion is also considered one of the agents of socialization. It shapes gender and family roles. Children, parents, and families reflect various values and norms and beliefs learned through their faith and religious tenets. And across all age and faith groups in 145 countries, women tend to be more religious than men in their belief in God, in their prayer, in their church attendance, and in saying that religion is important in their lives. Women are expected to be more pious and spiritual. Women transmit religious values to their children. And although women are more likely than men to be religious, they are often shut out of religious leadership positions in the church. Women earned 33% of theology degrees in 2009, a dramatic increase from only 2% in 1970. Yet women only make up 13% of the nation's clergy, and only 3% of female clergy lead large congregations. Even in liberal Protestant congregations, female clergy will be responsible for music or the youth or Bible study ministries. Okay, when it comes to gender and sports, girls' participation in sports has increased, but boys still participate more. Parents tend to have greater expectations for sons than their daughters. Women and men are similar in their interactions. In a study that recorded the conversations of college students in the U.S. and Mexico, they found that women and men spoke the same number of words daily, about 16,000. Studies published since the 1960s indicate that men are generally more talkative than women, but it depends on the situation, like decision-making tasks. When it comes to talking about themselves or interaction with children, women are more talkative. Research shows that our cultural norms and gender role expectations shape our communication patterns. Women are socialized to be more comfortable about their feelings. Men are socialized to be dominant and take charge, like in the workplace. Women ask questions, probing for greater, deeper understanding of feelings, and are much more likely to ask questions that encourage conversation. Women are very detail-oriented. Men get right to the point. Men's speech reflects conversational dominance, like speaking more frequently and for longer periods of time. Men show dominance by interrupting others, by re-interrupting the speaker's meaning or reinterpreting the speaker's meaning, and by redirecting the conversation. Men express themselves in assertive ways. The language is often forceful, direct, and authoritative compared to women. In this last part of the chapter, we'll cover the Global Gender Gap Index, overall gender inequality worldwide, economic opportunity and participation, and political empowerment. According to the World Economic Forum, no country in the world has achieved gender equality. Cross-cultural differences support the idea that gender roles are learned rather than innate. In 22 countries studied in different parts of the world, 90% of the respondents in 13% of the countries said that women and men should have equal rights. Yet attitudes and behaviors are different based on the Global Gender Gap Index. The Global Gender Gap Index measures women's status and quality of life in 135 countries, representing 90% of the world's population. Actually, I want you to take down the number 144 countries. Your slide here is more current than my notes. So the women's status and quality of life in 144 countries is what's measured. It is based on these key indicators: economic opportunity and participation, educational attainment, political empowerment, where women and men are in the highest political positions, and also health and survival. This index gauges the relative equality between men and women on the indicator. Of the countries using the GGG index in 2012, the top ranked were Iceland, Finland, Norway, Sweden, and Rwanda. They have the greatest gender equality in economic opportunity and participation, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. The U.S. ranks only 45th behind Cuba, Lesotho, Nicaragua, and the Philippines. The biggest gender gaps are in the Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa. The 5 bottom countries in gender inequality were Chad, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Pakistan, and Yemen. The areas of greatest gender inequality are in economic opportunity and participation and political leadership. So let's explore these 2 further. So what I'm going to talk about next is going to be derived and come from this table and what I just mentioned in these GI scores. So we're going to look at economic opportunity and political empowerment participation. So first, economic opportunity and participation. Women's economic opportunities and participation depend on a culture's attitudes, values, customs, and laws. The biggest gender gaps on whether women and men should have the same rights, including economic participation, are Egypt, Nigeria, Indonesia, Jordan, and Pakistan. Not all women endorse equal rights, and even if they do, they follow laws passed by men that restrict women's behaviors. Globally, female-owned business accounts for 40% of all privately held firms and generate $1.9 trillion in annual sales. Yet only 4% of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and 16% of all U.S. corporate board members are women, the same as it was in 1998. Gender equality is much lower in political empowerment than economic opportunity and participation worldwide. 19% of those holding seats in national legislature are women. Rwanda has 56%. 7 countries have 40 to 46% of those in high-level political positions. Only 18% of the U.S. Congress is made up of women. Of the 197 world leaders, 11% are women, presidents or prime ministers. Of 188 countries worldwide, women occupied 20% of the decision-making bodies, similar to Congress. The U.S. ranked 71st in women's political leadership, well below many African, European, and Asian countries, even below most Arab countries that we view as being repressive to women. Saudi Arabia is the lowest ranking country in the world. Their score is 0 on women's political empowerment. In 2011, King Abdullah announced that in 2015, women will be able to run as candidates in municipal elections, to serve on the King's Advisory Board, and will even have the right to vote with the male family member's approval. So why do women have few political rights and little political clout? Because half of all national governments have legal requirements to include women in political positions. Only half. As a result, women make up only 30% of the governing bodies. In places like Argentina, Cuba, Finland, India, Sweden, Rwanda, and many other countries. Next, we're going to talk about how changes in gender roles that we just talked about affect love and intimate relationships. That will be our next chapter.